we make a breakdown analysis of a mass of people who work with minds and those who work with hands, those who are on top and those who are at the bottom, and those who slide up and down somewhere between, we classify them into three groups. First, those who live entirely within the circumscribed circle of an enforced, arbitrary, established education, convinced that education is all sufficient to meet all needs. To this group, education is par excellence and nothing else counts. They live to embrace, support, and deliver for education's sake, and endeavor at all times, all places, and in all ways to place education on the highest plane as the dominating purpose of existence. And second, those who think and act partly within the inhibited or uninhibited circle of a liberal, free, and broadening education, convinced that education is in part important and is partially sufficient to some of man's needs, more important along some lines, less important in others, therefore endeavor to exist within the confines established by social standards, afraid to break loose from the established order of society for fear of criticism or ostracism. And third, those who realize that education plays only a small part as the source of human thoughts and actions, that in and behind the surfaces of artificial educations there is an innate that prompts better thinking and inspires greater and more efficient acting. They concede the necessity for some education for contacting the enveloping world. But in spite of this, rather than because of it, stress the necessity of knowledge of innate which prompts all. What percentages correct divisions of these man-made types place in their relations between innate and education are impossible to determine. They would fluctuate between 100% of either down to 0% of either. The greater mass are failures, depending upon where they arrive, between the sliding scale up or down, depending upon whether education is the ne plus ultra or innate is. If he arrives at the conclusion innate should and does supersede education, then he takes his place with the class amongst the masters of men, sets the pace, and in proportion becomes important in greater values to mankind. On the reverse, if education supersedes innate, he fills a countless niche in a solid phalanx of struggling human beings, drifting from day to day, job to job, striving to reach heights without knowing why, because he has not learned how to hitch his efforts to a star, nor does he recognize there is a star to which to hitch his ambitions. In this mad scramble for position, power, prosperity, educated man takes little time to think fundamental sources or purposes of action. He rushes madly headlong without mental knowledge, straight-line thinking, If man innately thought more, he would find he could do less and secure more. That's why innate meditation in repose and peace brings forth better fruit, because it requires less manual labor. Wasting educated time is to gain innate understanding of law, which secures better position, power, prosperity, peace, and poise. Try to put to use that vast egotistic and egoistic understanding you think you have within your education. Educationally and consciously, you keep your heart beating for 24 hours a day. Knowingly start energy flowing to lungs and keep them breathing. Once you intentionally put foods into your mouth, mentally direct and follow its paths from mouth to solid and fluidic waste, to kidneys and bowels, to urination and defecation, from one end to the other. Direct your educated thinking to this body's vast, glandular, fluidic, intercommunicating system, with its acids and alkalis, secretions and excretions, intercommingling as they do. Mix, intermix, and properly blend and balance them in right proportions, right places, at right times, to meet their chemical exigencies as they arise. Occasionally, when skin is cut or bone fractured, direct your educated thoughts to the very minute microscopic osseous tissue, cellular reserved in reserve centers. Expand them, bring them forth, deposit them in right quantities where needed to heal and mend abrasions and bone breaks. Could you educationally build a human body of 2 eyes, 2 noses, 2 mouths, 2 ears, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 sets of ribs, working independent of each other, each capable of individual function, each of which could be functionally and pathologically sick or abnormal, either or both of which you could educationally restore a normal function? If you educationally couldn't, what does? Knowing it does. You think you are some gigantic know-it-all, capable with mortar-board resting thoughtfully on your head. How capable are you under such tests? You think you can mix chemical compounds of certain kinds in certain quantities and qualities, plaster them on the outside, prescribe them for inside, or inject your miracle drugs internally, and such will do great handsprings, changing sickness to health. Later than sooner, failure forces you to concoct new ones, never reaching your goal. You can measure quantities, establish what you educationally call qualities, mix them according to rote and rhyme. But one thing you don't know, and never will: what will be the reaction of any one compound to any one person? Because your drugs are variables, and man is a constant, the two will never meet. What is one man's meat is another's poison. Give the same compound to 100 people and get 100 different reactions. There is no specific in medicine. There is no balm in Gilead. You think you can do certain things to and at the place a vertebral subluxation exists, and you make an adjustment. Could you adjust a dead man? Yet within you, inside you, intimately living in each of you, is a silent partner which completely and competently reacts to all this and more, silently all the time, with every tissue cell, without your consent, without your knowledge, in spite of you rather than because of you, which you educationally like to think you dictate terms to, control, direct, and manage, and can develop under your guidance. Innate reacts to utilize or rejects any substance depending upon whether it is for bodily good or would destroy function. Functions are direct or for good, or are adaptive to eliminate the bad, such as fevers or eruptive fevers. Words are vehicles of thought and indicate depth and breadth of understanding of realities. Words are used by educated people to express to others what they think, how they understand actualities, as they grope for words to conceal or reveal ideas. What is a thought? It is something we think. What is the process by which thought comes into being? Is it a reflection backward into memory of previous thought? If so, how account for the old or new original thoughts? What is an idea? It is an assemblage of thoughts formed into a larger thought. What is the process by which we assemble thoughts into an idea? Is it an addition of associations of previous thoughts dragged from memory into today? If so, how account for the old or new original thoughts? What is an ideal? It is a gathering of practical ideas that work, formed into a higher understanding, evaluation, intended to produce something better. Is it an improved series twist of multiplied association of previous ideas dug out of the deeper recesses of memory? If so, how account for the old or new original constructive ideals? Do thoughts, ideas, or ideals exist without matter through which they are expressed? Can matter exist without thought preceding its origination in form? If so, how? Are thoughts, ideas, or ideals ethereal and in existence without form and without matter? If so, how would man know? Can matter take tangible forms without thoughts, ideas, or ideals to create them? When we gather external impressions from the environment, take them to what we call our conscious mind, interpret them, separate the ones we want to save from ones we discard, what we have left is education. For what purpose do natural composite animals or humans think educated thoughts, ideas, or ideals, except that they be manifested, expressed by and through physical actions for some greater, grander, more glorious service beyond the ken and outside the bounds of the constructed views of the limitations of one person? That causes all ideas and thoughts, as well as their actions, to fit into some greater scheme of things. From what source do we, as finite beings, receive thoughts, ideas, and ideals, which eventually are applied in corporeal action? We think we see man feeding himself into some unknown destiny of thought and function resolving itself beyond his limited understanding. If physical action is dependent on thoughts, ideas, and ideals, as far as we know and understand. And if all manifestations of moving, living beings are dependent upon thoughts, ideas, and ideals, and this depends upon an organization of matter, such as brain, nerves, muscles, organs, viscera, and a flow of mental impulse supply between them, acting as intermediary between immateriality and physical function, and all this is beyond our scope, then who or what is the maker and organizer of matter through which thoughts, ideals, and ideas flow? If it takes all this in us mortals here on earth, how much greater must be thinking values? How much superior must be the thoughts, ideas, and ideals of that beyond our reach, which thinks, conceives, which makes not only us, but everything that coordinates the living, reproduces the species and families, generates its own power, transmits it as needed, expressing itself, personifying greater intellectualities and intelligences that create living, thriving, component organisms. If we are a product of a greater producer than our inferior educations, how much greater must be the producer of us minute, humble products? If we are the product of a plan, then how much greater must be universal intelligence producing that plan? As we educationally think thoughts, ideas, and ideals, trying to direct ourselves and govern all others, how much greater must be the thinking values, the superior ideas and ideals of the superior producer that issues all individual inferior products? Realizing how fearfully and wonderfully we are made and functionate, how much greater must we rely upon that universal organization that makes, evolutionizes, and revolutionizes all matter everywhere? If we grasp this greater understanding in its infinite wisdom and acting, is it common sense for us inferior products to act towards this superior power produced with us as an insignificant, infinitesimal, subconscious mind, to be despised, belittled, and scorned? If we grasp a knowledge, understanding of this infinite, innate power within us, how much more service could we render a sick world, knowing it, and it alone, thinks, thoughts, ideas, and ideals, getting sick people well? When we reach that conclusion, we will realize how humble we are, how little we inferior products produce, regardless of what we think in our thoughts, ideas, and ideals, knowing they all come from a source greater than our simple educations. We cannot conceive of a rose bush, a serpent, horse, fly, bird, tree, vegetable, or other species or families of living objects being arbitrarily and scientifically obliterated from the earth, except that this becomes a violation of natural law which placed them here for a purpose. Germs, microbes, parasites, all have functions to perform. Neither can we conceive of any living object, from insect to man, praying to this superior intelligence for its propagation, existence, or byproducts. Each gets exactly what each earns, regardless. In what respect, then, materialities in relation to one common denominator law. You say man has education. He speaks a language. Does it take less rose education to produce a rose? A serpent protects itself against enemies. A horse eats, urinates, and defecates. All animals from insect up have every function man has. A bird flies and manifests functions we cannot explain. It has been proved that all living things have languages of their own, not like ours. Therefore, we don't understand them. Neither do they understand us. As to their soul, who can prove they haven't such, inasmuch as they live the same as we? What is their source, which makes all able to do all they do? All matter, from planets to plants, is organized. It is such of necessity. Otherwise, this organization would destroy and disintegrate itself, and the world would be in chaos instead of cosmos as it is. And man is a part of that totality mass. Living man is living matter. Man is an organized mass of matter. Living organized man is living organized functional motion. From one organized individual tissue cell to the collaboration of the unity of the mass of tissue cells, each is functionally correlated in totality and unity. Man is a spiritual, electrical, mechanical, chemical, internal, heating and cooling, organized machine, directed and controlled by two mentalities, one internal, the other external. Here is where the great divide begins to separate man from other creatures. The temporary, exterior, inferior, educated mind, which is usually more or less disorganized in values, suggests it would like to run not only that portion of his body which contacts environment, but he wants to run all other men, animals, and the balance of the world to suit his caprices, theories, and idiosyncrasies. The prominent interior, superior, innate, highly organized mind directs and controls all internal, organized, organic functioning bodies, each complete unto itself, yet the combined sum total of all units completes a world of natural objects, which suggests, if left to themselves, innates of all units would not need the caprices, theories, and idiosyncrasies of mortal man to direct them. Millions of men and women, millions of other kinds of living component organized organisms have been functionally and are organically organized for millions of years over our earth. They have balanced their comings and goings naturally, regardless of habitation, species, or families. None of this could have occurred without a super organized intellectuality controlling the whole. Innate, a part of the whole, is individualized in each unital substance, portraying and exhibiting a super quality which is beyond the horizon of any one individual. Yet, let any man advocate such a broad horizon of knowledge, and the mass calls such a study a cult. Why should we, or any group of observers and students of mankind, find it necessary to rack our thinking propensities, to produce evidence, to convince men that behind all organized matter is an organized intellect? For lack of observation, understanding, and proof, some deny the existence of something superior to themselves. One of the great curses of man is his boasted, educated, highly inflated ego, placing himself superior to any other source of intelligence. There are those even in our ranks who shout with great reverence to the Almighty God on Sundays, in churches, and in their offices the other 6 days of the week, scoff, deny, and ridicule the existence of innate intelligence existing in bodies of patients capable of getting them well. By preference, think vitamin pills, aspirin tablets, and other exterior palliative or goading physical agencies advocating remedial and curative properties innate does not possess. They call such empirical. Hypocrites, say we, because they live a contradictory dual life, one principle denying the other. One of the most contemptible of these apostles of affirmation of God and denial of innate is an ex-preacher of a religion. One day of the week, Sunday, he preaches the kingdom of God. Other 6 days, he appears before chiropractors, denying the kingdom of God is within you, holding contempt for the innate in man. Verily we say unto you, some men are financially inconsistent egotists, which proves how shallow and superficial some educated inductions can be. Here is one bad egg in a nest of preachers and in our profession who in verity says, believe what I preach Sunday, but practice what I deny the other 6 days. There is a very strong binding parallel between what innate does to a liver as an example in producing bile and what innate could do in producing innate thoughts in an educated physical brain. After all, the educated brain is a physical tributary to the innate brain. The same as the liver, spleen, are tributary organs to the same innate brain. The chiropractic principle is simple. Innate brain possesses knowledge and know-how to generate understanding of how to run all functions of a living body, transmit innate mental impulse supply from brain through nerves to all parts of its body, where it performs action exactly as innate set it forth to do, expressing intelligent motion, life, and health. If there be interference between brain and body because of a specific vertebral subluxation, producing pressure upon nerves, reducing carrying capacity, reducing normal quantity flow of mental impulse supply, then the liver, spleen, or any organ, visceral, or tissue of the body slows down the speed of action per unit of time, and dyschase begins to exist and grow. Reversal of this process is equally true. If the specific vertebral subluxation is correctly adjusted, interference is released, pressure is eliminated, carrying capacity restored to normal, tissue cell speed is re-established, and life and health begin to regrow back to normal. All this is directed, controlled, and performed by innate intelligence. This is the premise, the principle and practice of chiropractic, which every chiropractor knows, lives, and prospers by, because his business is getting sick people well. And this is the only way this can be done, via and through and with the aid and help of innate intelligence. The totality of the living human brain is divided into two parts, educated and innate brains. Educated brain lives downstairs in the front parlor room. It looks out on the street, sees things, thinks things, does things it thinks need be done to live with the outside world. This is the brain that goes to school, reads books, is taught how to read and write, how to use fork and spoon. Ability it possesses to contact environment comes from the innate brain, which lives upstairs in the great big hall in the rear of the house, which is in contact with every floor, every square inch of that house, from roof to heating furnace and air cooling plant. It knows what is going on everywhere, all the time, and directs forces what to do, where to do it, how to do it, because it knows why to do everything. This brain is the master power station, the master intelligence that has lived for millions of years in millions of bodies, has a super world of internal experience. The educated brain lives once, in one life, and has very limited external experience. Peculiarly and inversely, the educated man thinks he is the great I am that I am, and tolerates the other innate fellow upstairs only because it seems he must, whether he will or no. It is the innate fellow upstairs which runs that entire body, every minute of the day, in every tissue cell of that body. It is the innate fellow upstairs that is ready, willing, ready, anxious to suggest, advise, and help the educated fellow downstairs how to live a fuller life, how to think accurately, correctly, efficiently, and competently, if the fellow downstairs will let him. But here is the great divide. The little fellow downstairs thinks he's everything, knows everything, needs no advice from any other source. He blows and puffs himself into a gigantic, egotistic conception of his importance, and educationally and completely ignores the other big fellow upstairs on the third floor back. Notwithstanding this all-important, all-capable, all-knowing big fellow upstairs wants to advise the little fellow downstairs, the little fellow locks the door between, throws away the key. This makes a stymie between the two. If the little fellow would listen and heed the advice of the big fellow, let innate flow through to education, the educated fellow's life would naturally be a success, richer, avoid stumblings and mistakes, and life would be without many unnecessary frictions and troubles which education artificially imposes upon itself. As innate is necessary and vital to get sick people well, without which sick people could not get well, upon which the chiropractor relies to get sick people well, without which the medical man never can and never does get any sick person well, so is innate as necessary and vital to getting education to think straight, think soundly, correctly, efficiently, and competently, dealing with its problems as it contacts the outer world. For after all, the educated brain is as much an organ attached to the innate brain as the stomach is an organ attached to the innate brain. Any difference being that in one, innate manufactures thoughts, and in the other, digestion. Digestion disconnected can go haywire, and so can disconnected, educated thoughts. Between the hours of morning and night, this philosophy is of an innate process of living. We admit everything so far as adjusting vertebral subluxation, releasing pressure upon nerves. We can accept that as the sound, sane, and sensible premise of restoring the normal flow, supply between the innate brain and the educated brain to produce normal, healthy, innate thoughts in the educated brain. We took our own life as an example of where we always let innate tell our education what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and why. We review our life from 18 years on, when we found ourselves, when we secured this great, big, broad understanding that innate knew more than education. Innate was more capable than education. Innate was more intelligent than education. Therefore, from 18 years on, we listened to innate in directing our lives. We reviewed the many trials, troubles, and tribulations, the big fights against insurmountable odds, where we fought the most gigantic trust in the world, took an unknown and ridiculed new principle and practice, and developed it into a successful professional empire, made it the second greatest drugless, but only natural method in the world, reversed the old process of treating effects to adjusting cause, took a prejudiced world and gave them a new way of getting well, where we often were compelled to spank many of our own children who, for mercenary reasons, wanted to and tried to seduce the pure and unadulterated chiropractic into a bastard medical practice, where oftentimes the parent of his flock had to criticize some of his children who became delinquent kids, committing many crimes against this marvelous service to mankind. Took this new method into every state and province and many foreign countries, all done under the direct instructions from innate to education. When a problem arose, instead of thinking the little fellow in the downstairs front room, looking out over a crazy world he had made, thought he knew the answer, we were cognizant that innate had licked that problem millions of times during its millions of years. So we became receptive, relaxed, became willing, and waited until innate would give us the answer in its own natural way, at its own natural time, when we were in tune and in rapport with innate, so innate could come through. And innate always did. We long ago learned the simple lesson that we educationally could not dictate to, suggest to, or advise innate when, how, or why she should tell our education anything. We could not talk from the front room downstairs up to the all-important fellow living upstairs in that great big back room on third floor. But when the big fellow upstairs found time right, it would and always did communicate downstairs to us. We listened and followed its instructions. Regardless of how different or foolish they seemed to education, they always worked right. If we denied, ignored, or repudiated those quietly transmitted thoughts, we always lost. When we received them, acted on them pronto, we always came out the big end of the horn of plenty. Now how did the upstairs fellow communicate its knowledge to the little fellow downstairs front? By thought flashes, which we long ago proved to be real through our electroencephaloneuromentempograph of innate brain to educated brain graphs with their characteristic graph wave patterns. In making these typograph graph wave patterns on thousands of people, we observed certain isolated patterns which duplicated themselves when a thought flash was coming through from and between innate brain and educated brain. For the first time in the history of man, we have definitely and scientifically proven through impulses flowing effortlessly between two brains, these graphs were expressing a thought which innate brain was delivering to education in educated brain. We isolated this pattern and were able to identify it as though it were a spoken idea. Long ago we learned that when innate thought flashes came, they must be accepted for full face value and acted upon at once, regardless whether we educationally thought they were right or wrong, good or bad, would or would not work. To do this was to humble education, but we looked up to innate and heeded its counsel. When do thought flashes come from innate to education? Anytime, day or night, when innate knows the conditions are just right. When and what are these conditions? They almost always come when education is least active, most absent, on a vacation. Many people find comfort and surcease in prayer, in the quietness and solitude of a church, where and when they think they are holding communion between themselves and their God, when in reality they are contacting most closely themselves to their own innate selves. Possibly one is in the woods just sitting, or he may be sitting on the back porch looking at the river, smoking a good cigar, or he may be out fishing where all is quiet and serene, and all the hustling, bustling city is miles away and is shut off from other cares and worries which jam clear thinking. Or he may be playing golf, miles from all disturbing influences, but where he is surrounded with peace. Or he may be asleep when education is totally absent, and innate can wake him to plant an inspiration, as they are sometimes called. Often we think of the yogis or the Mahatmas of India who sit for hours thinking nothing to receive something worthwhile. We have known propounders of worldwide movements to go off into the silence to meditate. It is when education is most non-committal that innate is most committal. When educated mind is quiescent, innate sneaks in and plants thoughts worthwhile of vast human value. Wasted time, doing nothing, is oftentimes the most valuable time we waste. We point out that every successful great man who has left his imprint on the paths of mankind has always been an ignorant man as formal education is concerned. But he has been and was a man who had learned the exact lesson we were now propounding. He listened to that wee small voice of innate, followed its ideas, and thus developed things which moved worlds upward and forward. Peculiarly, the same innate that was in every one of those men is in you now. You possess the same great dormant potentials as they, which could be processed and possessed into active reality. That you could have your innate work as well as they, if you went about it the same way they did. For hours, you can listen attentively, seriously, and thoughtfully. Frequently, you can nod your head in acquiescence. You can agree positively when we refer to how sick people get well. Hesitantly, when we refer to how to innately think natural, educated thoughts normally. You can understand the difference and futility between trying to get sick well by plastering, prescribing, injecting, stimulating, or inhibiting symptoms and pathologies from the outside. You can understand clearly the genuine values we have in chiropractic by opening channels between innate brain and innate body, permitting the natural flow of pure mental impulses to flow to the sick part, allowing time to rebuild dis-ease back to normal. All this, up to this point, is clear, understood, and agreed to. But when it comes to following the same process in permitting innate to cure educated incongruities, inconsistencies, unnatural, and abnormal processes of educated thinking, that is beyond the average educated comprehension. Time arrives when innate tells us we've told our story. Innate will tell us to stop and let you meditate upon it. Accept it if you can and reject it if you must. After a few minutes, your old ossified education will return with its muddled, mixed mazes and masses of complexities. You will begin to argue, discuss, and in parts deny our premise of how to live a better life. I had that happen this afternoon after the afternoon's talk. Having planted the seed of how to live a better life, we could not stay for weeks and months to feed it to you, to water it and see it grow in you, to produce its fruit. That is your job from here on in. As gracefully as we could, we try to break down your educated super conceit into a humble person, to break down your educated egotism and to replace it with a super knowledge of the all-importance of innate. Do we succeed? Time only can tell. At the time of writing this story, we learned that innate will not let us force issues. Man must take time to grow to newer standards, and growth takes time. Exactly the same way a sick man must take time to re-grow back to health. You cannot temporarily stimulate or inhibit educated symptoms and expect innate permanency. Whether you will adjust your educated subluxations and restore innate to its educated thoughts is debatable. But we have the innate satisfaction of knowing we have tried to supplant our life's evolution and how we live through your involutions. Now, conscious is used to express varied states of how education per se acknowledges his perceptions of himself as such tops over and above any other mentality that may or not be present within and in himself, such as his interpretations of the five senses, such as pain, acute, vivid, wretched, pleasant, intense, sudden, astute, happy, comfortable, sore, tingling, partial, slow, weary, bitter, natural, normal, rational, and many others. As you approach the problems of living in ways and means to solve the inner, unsolvable problems of inner subjective issues. Conscious people understand when we are conscious, or what happens when somebody hits us on the head and we are unconscious, or the state of our conscious mind when we faint and are unconscious. These terms apply to the conscious education we educationally think we know and possess. But what about that other mind? If there be another mind, the subconscious, non-conscious, and unconscious something. Words are vehicles we apply to indicate understanding or lack of understanding of this other mind, if there be such as seems so in doubt. Words are vehicles of understanding. Sub, non, and unconscious mean beneath, less than, inferior to. How much of this internal human structural territory of living human functions does educated, conscious minds direct, control, and govern in all parts, 24 hours a day, sleeping or waking? Very little, if any. How much of the internal human structural territory, living human functions, does subconscious, non-conscious, or unconscious mind, if there be such a mind, direct, control, and govern in all parts, 24 hours a day, sleeping or waking? All of it. That understanding of controlling divisions of our intellects being basically fundamental. What's wrong with our educated conscious terminology as applied? We speak of people being insane. What is insane by contrast to what is sane? What is haywire with an idiot? And what and where is the comparison between what is idiot and what is not idiot? What division of our thinking, controlling, and governing powers that be is not yet developed in an infant? Is it education per se? Is there something else at work? Directing, controlling, and governing all internal living functions from the moment of birth, notwithstanding there is no education? What divisional power of directing, controlling, and growing and governing is absent in amnesia? What divisional power of directing, governing, and controlling living human bodies is present in amnesia? Is there lack of, loss of, absence of conscious direction of thinking? Is there a superabundance of, presence of some other intellect that keeps on keeping on in spite of rather than because of the deficiency of education? Suppose there was no such thing as an innate on the job, and your so-called education had to take over the job of running, directing, and controlling all your complex internal functions with your meager understanding or ability. Could you take over and govern all human functions simultaneously? Suppose there was no such thing as an innate on the job, and your so-called limited education had to take over, could you construct 60,000 miles of blood vessels, direct arterial and venous flow from the heart to the lungs, from lungs to heart, from heart to body, and from body to heart, 24 hours a day from birth to death? And if something went haywire, could you do that which would bring it back to normal? And suppose INNATE were not on the job, and your so-called constricted education had to take over. Could you keep proper balance in blood flow between oxygen intake and carbon dioxide exhalation to balance external environmental conditions of heat and cold? If they got out of balance, as in fevers or chills, could you get them back into balance? And suppose there was no such thing as an INNATE on the job, and your so-called confined education had to take over. Could you direct the breathing 1,000 times an hour, waking and sleeping for 24 hours? Could you direct its diastolic and systolic rhythms 2,500,000,000 times and pump 6,500,000 gallons of blood weighing 258,500 tons? And should they become irregular, either way, could you make them regular? And suppose there was no such thing as an INNATE on the job, and your so-called book education had to take over. Could you build a human brain dynamo, generating nerve force for all that body, and squeeze it all into the small space of a human skull, equal to an external electrical system, equal to a skyscraper, the power of Niagara to run it, and of all Niagara's water to cool it? Why, of course not. Now, if your vast education could not construct one tissue cell or direct its function, how could your frontier education construct 400 billion of them and direct all human functions simultaneously, which costs through them continuously? The answers to all these questions of inferiority of education and superiority of INNATE are obvious. Why think you can? And why to try to supplant or replace INNATE? If you can't, let INNATE do all things which INNATE alone can do in health, sickness, or in restoring health when sick. The principle is simple. The practice is simple. The results are simple. Is it or is it not the better part of better educational judgment to study INNATE's ways and accomplishments, placing all emphasis upon it and less value upon education per se? Why maximize education when it has so little to do or give or offer, and minimize INNATE when it is the all-important architect, builder, director, and controller of all internal functions of all natural composite objects? Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto INNATE the things that are INNATE's. 94 and 44/100% of getting sick people well is INNATE. Educationally, we are that little simple twist of the wrist, the minor 56/100ths of 1%. The fundamental 1 weak link in the medical armamentarium which destroys the entire structure, which is the cornerstone of medical anatomists and physiologists, is the erroneous theory that the finite, educated mind can and does substitute for the infinite, innate mind. And their finite mind is their infinite mind. Chiropractors, per se, who know chiropractic, know there is nothing they, as the party of the first part, can give or take away from a sick person as party of the second part that can restore health. That natural, normal health and function are internal, inherent, innate qualities and qualities exclusively which flow from above down, from within out, within the patient himself or herself. We'll rest for 5 minutes. I mentioned this afternoon about the common man and the uncommon man. The common man is he who follows the path of least resistance, who thinks the educated thoughts of all educated people, and does the commonly accepted education of ideas. The uncommon person is the person who steps out of that role and becomes an innate, uncommon man, listening to his innate, thinking advanced, broader, bigger, better ideas. And then he becomes inspired to put them over to help mankind. He dedicates and consecrates his life to the pursuit of service to mankind. Eventually, of course, things come into his own. This year has been a year of things coming our way. We've had an article in the St. Petersburg Times, a page-and-a-half story. We had a story in the Des Moines Register and Tribune, a page-and-a-half story. We had a story in in Holiday. A story is coming out in September the 2nd in Fortune. We've had this recent story by Marcus Bach. This other story by Medical Economics. I don't care what they say about me as long as they say it. Now, this chap in Medical Economics remarked about the epigrams on the walls. If they hadn't been on the walls, he wouldn't have remarked about them. The fact that he remarked about them made them stand out as something he wanted to remark about. But I think one of the finest tributes that has been paid for several years came last week, when at the 80th birthday of the great man Herbert Hoover at his birthplace at West Branch, Iowa, in which I was one of the invited guests to have lunch with Herbert Hoover at his birthday party. This in itself was a tribute, not to the educated fellow, because there is no educated fellow. I am an ignorant fellow. I quitulated high school at the first half of the first year, expelled for taking live rats to high school and turning them loose, so that the girls would climb up on the desk and raise their skirts so we could see their legs. I am an ignorant man, but I am an innate man. And because innate has directed our lives, we have accomplished some things. And at the same time of this birthday party, we had our WOC-TV and WHO-TV, a $200,000 equipment on the grounds, and our stations fed the National Broadcasting Company and the Columbia Broadcasting System Herbert Hoover's all-day program. Twice in the morning on Dave Garroway's Today, on the program of Home, and also the whole 4 hour of program in the afternoon of his speech. And there I met, again, many of the great men of state of Iowa, such as Mr. Hansher, the president of the State University, Governor Beardsley, Governor of Illinois, all that sort of thing. Now, that couldn't have happened a few years ago. Then the next night, I was the guest of Governor Beardsley at a talk and a dinner at the Hotel Savory, by invitation from Governor Beardsley direct, to meet with 40 of the businessmen, the big businessmen of the state of Iowa, so that 10 outstanding industries of the state of Iowa could be written up in a story of Iowa in Fortune in September, of which WOC and WHO was one of the 10. So you see, the uncommon man comes into his own, but it's a long, hard road. Now, I say these things in a sense of modesty and humbleness, because I take no credit for it. I give all that credit to the innate within me, which directs and tells me what to do and how to do and when. But the thing that I want to say to you is, the same innate that resides in me that has made my life somewhat of a success is the same innate that lives in you. What could happen into this world of service if every chiropractor listened to his innate? We could lift this world. What could have happened? Could I have gotten to Hitler and given him one Atlas adjustment, that crazy, insane paranoiac, and made him sane, destroyed his hatred of the Jews? I could have, by that one little adjustment upon one crazy man, have saved 20 million lives. Simple, how big it is. Just think of it. And you can do the same things. The trouble is, as individuals, you say, who am I? I'm a little fellow. I'm practicing up here in a small town. I don't know anybody. I'm not doing anything great. But just remember, the same innate that impels Edison, that impels Steinmetz, that impelled Henry Ford, that impels every other Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart, that impelled Michelangelo to build St. Peter's, David, Moses, Pity, the mystery of life, those great Carrara marble, beautiful things, that same thing that led him on and all the great artists and musicians of the world, that same push from inside out is the same thing that lives in you if you let it push you. And if every chiropractor could let it push him, what a wonderful world we could convert this world into. We could reconstruct all the failures of medicine if we do it that way. Oh, I know. It's new. It's evolutionary. It's revolutionary. It strikes you as a hard road to have to travel. And it is. It's a thankless job. But oh, what an inward satisfaction you occasionally know when innate is directing your lives. But let me again say, there's only one way this can be done. When you are at ease with yourself, innate will flash a thought through to you. It won't come in words. It won't come in a great surge. It won't come in a volcanic eruption. It'll come in quietly. sort of sneak in, and you'll find something coming in that you're thinking without having thought it. And when it comes, grab it. Right then, make a note of it. Don't lose it. And as it comes, act upon it. Right then. Because innate is a personality. Just like two people living in the same house. You slight innate. You ignore innate. You debate innate. You challenge innate. And innate, like any other person, will say, okay, if I'm no good, you won't listen to me? Why should I worry you with my troubles, with my ideas or ideals? I just won't give them to you. I'll retire. I'll do what I have to do, but not any more than that, because you think you're the great fellow, and the great big fellow thinks I'm the little fellow. All right, I'll let you think that if you want to, and you'll lose every time you do. And you'll be just one of the common men and common women amongst the mass of common men and common women. But if you want to stand out and do great things, it can be done if you will take the great route to achieve them. That's the message of our day. In Marcus Bach's story, you know, I've been called everything under the sun, and it's most usually been bad. But Marcus Bach says in this story, he looked like a prophet. He talked like a prophet. He electrified the crowd with his convictions. He wasn't a preacher. He was a layman, a businessman, an executive. But in my youthful eyes, he was Elijah, defying the priests of Baal. He was Paul, addressing the crowds on Mars Hill. So you see, now I'm in the Bible. And in this other story in medical economics, he says, in the eyes of the drugless or straight cut of chiropractors, Benjamin Joshua Palmer, a chunky, bearded Iowan of 73, is a prophet, the caliber of John the Baptist, whom he faintly resembles. However, unlike the biblical martyr, the king of Cairo has kept his head. In other words, Salome wasn't around anywhere. Now, I mention these things because the outstanding man is being written about now. He's coming into his own after all these years of struggle. And you can achieve the same end. That's the message that I want to get over to you today. Tomorrow, I think we will take the subject, what about our future, which is already written, and carry that tomorrow. That's all, and good night.